Hey everybody, this is Josh.
Hey, and this is Dean.
Hey, and so we're back this week. We're working on our series of finding an agent, and we got some good stuff for you this week. Dean has got his first response back from an agent, so we're going to cover that. We're also going to talk about what Dean has been up to in the last week regarding his search for more agents to query. And then we're going to talk a little bit about your elevator pitch. That's one of the important things that you need to work on with your novel. As soon as you tell people you've written a book, the first thing they're going to ask you is, what's it about? And you need to have a quick response. People don't want to hear you talk for 30 minutes about that. So your elevator pitch is your brief response to what your book is about, and you need to really hone that down. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to talk about some potential pitfalls for writers. Once you do establish an agent relationship, you're going to get a contract in your hands, and what are you going to do with that? And then finally, we're going to wrap up, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been reading this week. So let's go ahead and get started. Dean, you want to tell us a little bit about this response you got from an agent?
Sure. I've been sending out agent letters. I've sent out about 15 so far, and I've been going through various books to find them. And I happened upon one that I just, the mischievousness in me got the better of me. So I found an agent. I'm not going to say who. I'm just going to say blank. And they had a social justice statement that I found rather intriguing on their website. And I'm going to read from part of that. Blank stands against oppression. Black lives matter. Racial injustice is wrong. Our country and world need change for fairness, justice, and peace. We promote deep listening, productive conversations, and social change. In honor of these values, blank made a donation to the following organizations. And they list some organizations that I'm not going to say their names. As a company that supports creators of books, we know that both words and silence are powerful. May we, as a company, use words and that cut off words and silence. Something about words and silence, and you have to have safe spaces. Anyway, that gives you the gist of it. Part of that, I took a screenshot of it, and part of it was cut off. Not that I necessarily am opposed to some of the expressed things they're saying there, but I think there's an implicit ideology there that I question. So as a result of that, I was like, I know this agent will never in a million years want to represent someone like me. And so I thought it would be fun to send them a query letter. So I wrote them a query letter. I went over my book, Matriarchs, which I think I've already given that before, so I won't go over that again. But just for fun, I added in, I've been researching potential agents online, and I knew I had to query your firm when I ran across your firm's webpage. The statement on social justice is a screed of our times. If this particular novel doesn't work for you, I've also got another I wrote about the Reconstruction era in the Deep South that you will find to have a particularly unique voice. Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to hearing from you. So I sent that query letter out to this agency that will remain nameless, and I got a quick response. So that was.
So when did you originally send this query out?
January 23rd. And 7 days later, which is a record, normally you don't even get a response
Right.
of any kind. So 7 days later, I got, dear writer, thank you for your inquiry.
You got dear writer?
Yeah, dear writer. Thank you for your inquiry. We are sorry that we cannot invite you to submit your work to or offer to represent you. Moreover, we apologize that we cannot respond in a more personal manner. We wish you the best of luck elsewhere. Sincerely, blank. Clearly, my letter got a rise out of them. I don't think I would have gotten a rejection letter quite that quickly if it hadn't been for the somewhat sarcastic tone that I had in my query letter. I knew that they weren't going to represent me, and just thought it would be fun send the query letter just for the hell of it. So that's what I did.
Nah, well, can't say that I'm shocked by that. So the social justice statement and the things that you talked about that agent had listed, do you see that very often when you're looking at agents?
Quite a bit, yeah. And I don't know if it's just I think it partly may just be that, you know, they think that everyone believes these things, and so they have to kind of say it to be with the in crowd, you know. In other words, it's just kind of a mass conformity type thing. And a lot of people, they're saying these things and they haven't really thought through what a lot of this means. And as a result, you know, they haven't really thought in depth about, you know, what saying I'm for social justice means, and, you know, what that is going to entail, and the massive injustices that it's going to perpetrate against groups that are not, you know, from the selected, you know, minority group that needs to be protected, or they think needs to be protected.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about how the perspective of our characters and maybe our political attitudes, you know, could harm us a little bit or might work against us in trying to find an agent or trying to get published. There's one particular market that I had looked at submitting to. This wasn't an agent, but this was just a publisher that I thought about sending a short story to. And so I was reading their submission guidelines, because I try to be on top of that, and I try to make sure that I'm fully compliant with all their submission guidelines so that I'm not, you know, kicked out right off the bat. And so this was one of the things that they had in their submission guidelines that I just figured I ended up not submitting to them, and I'll tell you why when I'm done. So one of their criteria says, you know, we encourage work from authors typically underrepresented in publishing, such as women. Okay, well, first of all,
women are not underrepresented in publishing.
Yeah, I would encourage anyone to go out there and look at a list of publishers or a list of agents and try to find a man. But so women are not underrepresented, but apparently that's sort of prerogative. So, you know, typically underrepresented in publishing, such as women, people of color, LGBTQ, and those from non-Western cultures. Now, and I will say that this was a publisher that is based in the United States, but they're looking for perspectives from non-Western cultures. But then they had, and that's fine. You know, if people want, you know, more diverse writing, I don't fault them for that. And there's a lot to be gained from reading from different perspectives. But that statement's followed by this sentence, which is really what dissuaded me from submitting to them. It says also, if the previous sentence pissed you off for some reason, then you definitely aren't the kind of author we want to hear from. And so the previous sentence didn't really piss me off, but the hostility in the second sentence kind of made me think that these are pretty close-minded people that I don't think I really want to submit to. That's a pretty hot take on people that are going to be submitting stuff to you. So I just moved on, but I went ahead and took a screenshot of that because I just thought, you know, wow, it's pretty in your face.
Well, there's a whole ideology there associated with the social justice movement where they think that white males somehow have all the power and control everything. And so they have to try and balance the scales by doing everything they can to hobble that group of people from having success in life, I think.
Yeah. No, I think there's something to that. It's one of those things where it's lifting others up by tearing another group down almost.
Yeah, it's a massive injustice that's committed in the name of what they call social justice, whatever that means.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, a little fun entertainment there. Let's go ahead and move on, and let's talk about the what Dean's done in the last week on his agent search.
In the last week, I got into a little bit of a bottleneck. I ran across a couple of agents that wanted a 1 to 2 page synopsis of my novel Matriarchs, which I'm currently submitting to agents. I had done the 5 to 6 page synopsis because another one didn't really specify how long they wanted it to be. So now I'm trying to cut down and get it down to about 1 to 2 pages. I only did, I compiled, I found 5 more agents to send query letters to. The other bottleneck aspect was I went through one book on agents and kind of compiled a list there. And now I'm going through another book and I'm having to make sure that I'm not using the same, or I'm not requerying the same agents. You know, I'm trying to make sure that, you know, it's consistent with the list that I've already compiled. So that's taken me a little bit of time.
Are you keeping your agent list in a spreadsheet or any type of a format?
I'm keeping it in Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and I usually list like the agent name, where they're located, contact info, and maybe a brief note about them in terms of what they want in terms of a submission.
Gotcha. And are you making some note of like whether you've queried them and when or anything?
I highlight the row that they're contained in, you know, so that it's highlighted in a different color, and that way I kind of know what I've sent out to. But then here's the big problem. I'm only putting in the agents I want to query. And if I've gone through one book and I've seen, I don't think this agent's going to work for me, you know, for whatever reason, I've skipped past it. There's no way to really check that other than kind of go back through the other book and see if I saw that agent. So that, I don't know, I may need to think about how I'm doing this in terms of agents that I don't think are going to work, because then I'm in the new book, it may be an agent that I already decided isn't going to work. And I'm re-looking at their website and trying to refigure out, you know, if this agent's going to work for me.
Yeah, it could be that if they're listing themselves in more than one market, you know, putting themselves out there in more than one avenue, then they may be trying to tailor that to different audiences too. You know, you might come across them in one format and they're like, oh, we want this. And then in another one, they might be saying, oh, we want this. Or,
yeah, true.
And you don't know what they said in the previous one that made you pass on them.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to think about how I'm doing that, you know, I may need to figure out, you know, if I'm going to pass on an agent, maybe I need to write down their name at least.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let's go ahead and move on and let's talk about the elevator pitch. That's what you need to have refined when you tell someone, hey, I wrote a book, and that person immediately shoots back and says, oh, what's it about? This is what you need to say, is your elevator pitch. And of course, you know, it's kind of cliche now, but it's called an elevator pitch because it's something you want to be able to spout off while you're on an elevator with somebody. So this is kind of my elevator pitch for my first novel, Hellbender. And the elevator pitch ended up working its way into the back cover content. And that's one good thing about it. When you design an elevator pitch and you tell people what your book is about, then that works really well for helping you formulate your synopsis or your cover copy. Anything like that, you can kind of use this to work from. But this is about a 50 to 75 word distillation of what your book is about. And so then if you need to expand it a little bit more for back cover copy, it's real easy to puff that up a little bit. It's real easy to, well, I say real easy, but it's easier to puff that up into a short synopsis. But it gives you a lot to work from. And if you can do that early on, it'll definitely help you understand what your book's about and help you convey that to other people. So here's my elevator pitch for Hellbender that I ended up using on the back cover for back cover copy. Hellbender, a Southern Gothic coming-of-age novel, follows Bobby Graywood through the summer of 1946. Small-town politics, minor league baseball, and a series of horrific events bring together a unique cast of characters, including Newton Hellbender, the ominous new preacher, and his Weasley sidekick, Randall Good. With the help of Jubal Moss, an outcast Cajun baseball player just returned from World War II, can Bobby embrace his affliction and prevent the destruction of all he holds dear? So that's my elevator pitch. And this is why it's written the way that it is. This is everything that your elevator pitch should accomplish, and this is what I tried to accomplish in mine. It needs to tell the reader what the book is about. So mine is about Bobby Graywood in the summer of 46. He has an affliction, a supernatural affliction, and that's kind of his internal conflict or his internal challenge that he has to get past. He's also dealing with some external issues like small town politics and this new preacher that's come to his church that seems to be a pretty bad dude. So this is set in East Texas, post World War II, small town setting. And then you want to tell your readers why they should care. And so for mine, it's, can Bobby embrace his affliction? Can he overcome his personal conflict and prevent the destruction of all that he holds dear? So he's trying to prevent the destruction of his town, the loss of his friends and family against these evil forces. And I think that's something that most readers will care about, or at least I hope that that's something they'll care about.
How should an elevator pitch be different from the synopsis that's typically given in the back of a book, or on the inside jacket cover of a book? How, is there a difference between those two, and how do you think they're different?
I think that the elevator pitch can help you formulate the other things. Have back cover copy here, but then on the hardback, at least when you open the book, I've got flap copy here that gives readers a little bit more detail. In a lot of ways, both of those things kind of cover the same material. They're both giving maybe a little bit different perspective or a little bit different slant on kind of the same things that are covered in that elevator pitch. But in refining that elevator pitch down as narrowly as I could, it then helped me convey to other people what the book was about, but then it also helped me draft that back cover content to try to hook readers in. And it also helped me prepare that inside flap content to give just a little bit more. So there's so many things that you have to prepare when you're trying to make content for a novel. You've got that elevator pitch, which is 50 to 75 words. You have your back cover copy, which might be 150 words. You've got your inside flap copy, which might be another 150 words or so. And all of those things are going to kind of touch on the same thing, but they're going to put it in maybe in just a slightly different way that hopefully is going to intrigue the reader or give them just a little bit different perspective or a little bit different insight into what's going on. But yeah, in a lot of ways, each of those are just going to be a little bit longer summary. You got your elevator pitch, which is going to be your shortest summary of your book. And then you're going to have your back cover or flap copy that's going to be a summary of your book. And it's just going to be a little bit longer. And then you can build on that and add into that more details that you feel are necessary in order to create that one-page synopsis or that little bit longer 2-page synopsis. And you can keep filling in details that are important to you that help flesh out the story. And as you're building up, I think on a novel, especially if your novel's 80 to 100,000 words, it's really, really difficult to hit on every single plot point. And so part of the difficulty in creating a synopsis or an elevator pitch is how do you cut out all of this stuff that you've spent a year writing and developing?
Right.
How do you just say that's no longer important? I don't, if somebody asks you what's your book about, and you've just dedicated a year of your life to writing 100,000 words, and now all of a sudden you got to boil it down to 50 words. That can be really hard to do. But
Right.
once you can do that, I found that then, going back and starting to insert like, okay, well, if I'm going to go from 50 words to 150 words, what are the next most important details from this story that I can inject in there that are going to hook people in? And so I think for creating back cover content, that elevator pitch is pretty important because you can then build on it to expand it out.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that helps for me in terms of thinking about the distinction.
So had you worked on like a preliminary pitch or an elevator pitch for matriarchs?
I did, and I kind of took it from my query letter, although I changed it a little bit from the query letter based on assuming a true elevator pitch would be something you're orally going to tell someone rather than in writing. So I kind of based it on that assumption.
So Dean's read his query letter in the past, but part of that query letter you said was your elevator pitch. Is that right?
Or the elevator pitch is taken from the query letter. It's modified
okay.
though from it.
Oh, okay. Do you want to read that or give that
Sure.
elevator pitch?
Sure. It's science fiction with Rip Van Winkle time travel to a futuristic dystopia. A father and son are camping in contemporary America. They wake up about 40 years in the future. Initially unaware that anything has changed, they have a series of increasingly bizarre encounters. Father and son are separated, and the rest of the novel is about their efforts to reunite while avoiding the authorities in a Marxist feminist totalitarian regime.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, that does a really good job of covering all the points. That tells everybody what the book is about, which is essentially about a father and son who are separated in their effort to reunite. Gives them context, so we know that it's
Genre.
set. Yeah,
Well.
genre, a future dystopia, and in which they have all these challenges from governmental structure and external challenges preventing them from reuniting. And then it also kind of gives the reader a reason to care, because we all care about the future of our country, and we all care
Our
about
children and
our children. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So I think that's a good example. And hopefully, if other people are working on putting together their elevator pitch for either what they've written or what they're currently working on, then, maybe that can give people a little bit of guidance. But, if you're watching this and you have any questions or any comments on elevator pitches, leave us a comment or ask a question. And one of the things that I'd like to do in the future, once we get some more comments and questions down below, is maybe we can incorporate like a Q&A session into this series. And so every week, once we're talking about things, we can look at questions that people have asked in the past, and we can address those and maybe get a little bit of a Q&A going.
we would definitely be happy to do that.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. So then the last thing we wanted to talk about this week was maybe some potential issues that authors can look forward to, I guess is one way to say it. If you are lucky enough to land an agent, you're going to end up with an agent contract in your lap. And you're going to be going over that, and there's going to be some legalese in there, and you're going to have to try to navigate through it. And what do you do? Dean, you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was noticing, and I've mentioned this book before, when I was going through this book on agents, that several of the agents mentioned the fact that they were attorneys. And they even had overlapping law practices, it sounded like, either representing publishers or representing writers. I suspect since they're agents, they're probably representing writers legally. And I also noticed there was one agent who mentioned getting emails from a writer's family member who was a lawyer, but not a specialist in the publishing field, asking a bunch of what would basically be newbie questions about the legal contract, because the lawyer didn't really know anything about that area of specialization. And Josh and I kind of analogize that to, like, if you have a problem with your brain, you don't go to a podiatrist and expect the podiatrist to perform brain surgery on you. I mean, law has its specializations. And so I think, if you're lucky enough to get to the point of engaging an agent, what do you do in terms of going over your agent contract and making sure that you're not getting ripped off or being exploited by an unethical agent or someone who's, unethical?
Yeah, I think that anytime you practice, or if you have any type of profession or what have you, people are going to come to you with questions. And I know I get questions all the time from friends and family. People have legal issues that come up all the time. And if they know I'm an attorney, so they come to me with their legal questions, and you want to help people. You wouldn't be in this profession. I know this probably runs contrary to what most people think about lawyers, but most of us wouldn't be in this profession if we didn't want to help people, because ultimately that's what we do. People come to us with their problems, and we do the best that we can to help solve those problems in the best way possible for that person. So when people come to you, you want to help them. But when people come to you with a problem that's out of your area of specialty, you don't want to hurt them. And if someone comes to you, like, for example, I don't do family law, but if people come to me with a question about family law, I appreciate that they want my help and that they think highly enough of me to come ask me a question. But at the same time, the last thing in the world I would want to do is give them some advice on something that I don't know anything about, and then it lead to a detrimental outcome for them. And I feel responsible for that, or they hold me responsible for that because I didn't give them good advice or good legal counsel. So when I get questions about things I don't know a lot about, like family law, I'll tell people I can't really help you with that. You need to go talk to somebody that's a specialist in family law. And sometimes I think people think I'm blowing them off, or that I don't want to help them, or I don't think I have time to help them, or I don't want to do work for free, because sometimes
Well,
people
you don't want to do work for free usually.
you don't really want to do work for free,
Yeah.
but I don't mind helping people.
Helping out friends and family members sometimes.
Yeah, and so there's a tightrope that you have to walk there, because people will ask you a question and they think, oh, this is a real quick thing, it won't take long. But there's really not such a thing in the law, because especially if it's something that you don't know much about, before you tell people, I mean, you don't even want to tell people to cross the street unless you've gone and you've researched the legal issues and the law on that. So it's not like you really just can't give people 5 seconds worth of legal advice. You got to make sure that you're giving them sound advice and stuff. And so you got to be real careful. There's no such thing as just, really quick off the top of your head legal advice. And then you don't want to give people advice that's going to hurt them. I mean, the last thing in the world I would ever want to be responsible for is somebody, a friend or a family or somebody losing custody of their children or something because I gave them legal advice when I didn't really know what I was talking about. And, here I am, somebody that does like civil litigation. I don't deal with family law much. I don't deal with criminal law much at all. And, I deal with contracts or things of that nature. And so somebody has an issue with family law and they want me to give them advice, but the attorney on the other side of the case is, most likely someone that's been practicing family law for 15 or 20 years, and they know all the ins and outs of it. They know exactly how to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And I don't know those things because I don't work in that area every day. And so it's going to be kind of the same situation if you're looking at an agent contract and you know someone who's an attorney and you're like, hey, can you look at this contract? That person might be able to look at contractual language and they might know some very basic things, but they're not really going to know the ins and outs and the finer points of dealing with agency contract situations.
I want to throw out a little bit what I think you would want to look for in terms of an attorney if you were a writer needing legal representation. I think you mentioned one thing was the attorney's got to be familiar with dealing with contracts in general, and they have to have some contract law experience. I also think another big area would be knowledge of intellectual property law, especially copyright law, and kind of knowing things like, the difference between a work made for hire and, when is something a work made for hire versus when it's not, and how that affects your copyright and who owns the copyrights and things that are created. You need to have an attorney that at least knows those two areas of law, I think.
Yeah, you're also going to want to have an attorney that's familiar with agency relationships and exactly what type of authority and permissions you're giving to that agent to represent you, what they're going to be allowed to bind you to, things of that nature. So you need to have some pretty good knowledge of the publishing industry and of agency in general.
I agree.
All right. So if anyone has any more thoughts or questions, or if you've ever dealt with any type of an agent contract, feel free to leave us a comment below or ask questions, and maybe we can talk about that and expand on it in a future episode. So, Dean, you want to talk a little bit about what you've been reading lately?
Sure. The audiobook I've been listening to this week is, and I've read some of this stuff before, is Harry Turtledove's Two Fronts. And he really loves covering World War II alternate history, and he's going back to that well here, I think. I think this is fairly recent. The alternate history, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a sub-branch of science fiction or speculative fiction where someone asks what would happen if something different had happened in history, like what if the Roman Empire had never fallen or something like that? What would today look like? So this one, it sounds like the alternate history is pretty subtle. It starts out with the French having joined the Germans in invading Russia at the beginning of World War II. So the French and the Germans were allied. And at some point, the French then switched sides and joined the English and the Russians, and it creates differences in the timeline as a result of that. And he's kind of just going over different characters on all sides: Germans, Russians, English, French, and their perspectives on what's going on in this alternate World War II that's continuing on. It's already 1942, and the war, it seems like, is just kind of getting heated up.
How far into that are you?
I'd say I'm about a third of the way into it, and it's like I said, it's very subtle alternate history, because a lot of things seem pretty similar, and I'm no expert in World War II history, but usually he has some amazing new technology that creates a really different alternate history. Like, he might have, what if the Germans had developed nuclear weapons before the Allies had? How would that affect World War II, or something like that? Here, there's less, changes in technology affecting one side or the other. Although he does have, I think it's going to go somewhere. He's got one Japanese character who is a biological weapons specialist, and they're developing biological weapons to drop on China, basically, to try and wipe out the Chinese. And I have a feeling that's going to play into the novel as it goes along. So I'm curious to see where that goes.
So I've never read anything by Turtle Dove, but I know that you have in the past. What is what's the plot or the conflict, or what's the underlying kernel of the story? Because there's a lot of alternate history that seems to me, like, not having read any of his books, it seems to me like that's context and that's kind of the setting and the hook for it. But what's really going on with the protagonist, or what are we hoping to accomplish? What's the main thread?
Well, with his war stuff, it's always mostly just the characters are trying to survive the war and hoping not to get killed. And, they're usually on the battle, they're in the front lines, usually getting shot at, or, doing the shooting. So that's kind of, survival tends to be those characters, main focus. And then the other big focus, obviously, is trying to win the war for their side and end it. So I'd say in general, and most of his alternate history seems to be centered around wars, although I think he's written stuff that wasn't necessarily centered around wars. I think he wrote a series of novels about what happened if the Roman Empire had never fallen, and it was, modern times, and it was still the Roman Empire in control. And then, there, I think he'll create a conflict within that setting. So that's the setting. And then he just creates a general, thriller type, a thriller conflict within that setting. So, there's a science fiction setting, and then he's just basically constructing a thriller around it.
Gotcha. So it's almost kind of a standard, somebody's in a war trying to survive the war, trying to win type thing. But I guess the real hook in his is the alternate history.
Yeah.
setting.
Yeah. I mean, people are reading it more because of the alternate history setting, and, what if this happened?
Gotcha.
But then you gotta have some kind of story around that. You can't just, present this alternate setting. So he just has a more generic conflict type setting, someone fighting a war and trying to survive it, or something like that, which could be, any war story that was ever told, pretty much.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, sounds pretty interesting. I've never read anything by him, but how many books have you read of his?
4 or 5, I'd say. I haven't read a lot of his stuff, but yeah, I've read several, and he seems to have really made a good living out of writing alternate history, and he's very well known in science fiction circles as an alternate history guy. He's probably the alternate history guy in science fiction circles writing today.
All right. So I think that pretty much wraps up what we want to cover for this week. But what do you think we'll be covering next week?
Well, my goals for next week are add more agents to my list, and also work on my 1 to 2 page book synopsis.
Yeah, for me, mine's going to be continuing to revise my novel, Red Phantom, and working on a list of potential small publishers or agents that I can query to. Small publishers mostly for my short story collection, and agents that I can query to for the Red Phantom. And so I'm going to keep looking at that. And also, I want to encourage everyone to like and subscribe and leave a comment. Let us know if you're watching, if you have any interest in where we're going. And also, give us some feedback. Let us know what you would like to see us talk about, things that maybe you're working with as a writer, or if you're trying to find an agent, trying to get published, if there's things that you'd like to hear somebody talk about that you're just not seeing anything out there for, you just like some guidance or some people to just have a discussion about it and maybe, just bring some issues to the forefront. Let us know. Like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. We'd like to try to get enough questions that we can do maybe a Q&A session. You leave us a question and, we'll read your question and let people know who asked it if you want us to. And we can elaborate on that, maybe do a little bit of research if we need to, and come back and give you a little bit more insight to it. Since I've published a novel in the past, well, 2 novels in the past, and a short story collection, that might be something that I've dealt with. If you have a question about self-publishing, feel free to ask that too, because Dean and I have both been down that path, and we can probably give you some advice or at least tell you what we did on that. So, Dean?
That sounds good to me. See everybody next week.
All right. Have a good one. Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Ah, shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
what's going into the sausage here?
There's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.